Welcome everyone. I am Professor Alva Taylor, and I'm the faculty director of the Center for Digital Strategies. Welcome to the CDS Fireside Chat on behalf of my colleagues at the CDS, Joe McDonald, Patrick Wheeler, all of my colleagues at Alumni Engagement. We are really excited to have this lunchtime fireside chat. First of all, hopefully everyone is safe and healthy, but it's our great pleasure to have this discussion with Laura Scott. She's a TO3. She's currently Chief Operating Officer at Takeoff Technologies. Takeoff is an automated solution company for what they call micro fulfillment around groceries, and we'll hear a little bit more about that. Prior to going to Takeoff, she was with Wayfarer, and I think she was there for about 9 years, where her last job there, where she was VP of Supply Operations and International Operations. So amazing experience, and I'm sure we're going to hear some wonderful sort of stories and lessons about operating both prior to and during this chaotic time. So welcome, Laura. It's great to have you, and you can make the time.
Thanks, Alva. Thanks, great to be here with everyone.
So Takeoff's been the growth. It's been very successful. I think it's only about 3 years old.
That's right.
And it's everything I look at, it's been a great story. So give us a little bit of a background on the start of the company, why it started, sort of the origin story, and how it sees itself fitting in the overall grocery industry space.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting story. So our CEO went to Harvard Business School. After business school, he was originally from Venezuela. He had done some consulting and things, and he decided after business school to go back to Venezuela and start a company. And the company that he started was a grocery retail chain. It was a lot like Aldi, sort of like Trader Joe's, like a limited curated assortment, but it was specifically targeted at lower income folks. So the products and the prices were very accessible to low income folks. They hired people who otherwise had a hard time getting jobs. They provided free lunch every day. So it was sort of an interesting sort of social entrepreneurship venture. Well, it was extremely successful. And over the course of a number of years, they grew it to be thousands of stores and grew beyond Venezuela into neighboring countries. Well, unfortunately, in Venezuela, with the political situation, when your business gets to a certain size, the government can decide that you are, that your company needs to be under the control of the government. So his company got expropriated by the Venezuelan government, and he decided that was a good time to go take a sabbatical. He came back to Boston and was sort of an entrepreneur in residence at Harvard Business School, where he happened to be there at the same time as a guy named Mick Mounts, who some people may recognize his name. He was the founder of Kiva Systems. Kiva Systems was a robotics company that Amazon bought probably 10 years ago and became the beginning of Amazon Robotics. So here he is, Jose, he's into grocery, he's thinking about his next thing. He's spending a lot of time with this guy, Mick, who knows a lot about robotics. And he ends up with this idea of why, grocery is so labor intensive. What would happen if you could automate a large part of grocery fulfillment, and then could you actually really increase penetration of online grocery, and could you lower the cost of food overall? So through his work in Venezuela, he actually got invited to the World Economic Forum in Davos. He went to Davos, and when you go to Davos, there's an unwritten rule that you can ask for 5 minutes of anyone's time, and they have to give it to you. So he asked for 5 minutes of the CEO of Walmart's time, pitched him on this idea for automated grocery fulfillment, back of a paper towel type of thing. And the next day, the CEO of Walmart asked him for an hour. The next week, he came to Boston, and it actually spun off this company called Alert Innovation, which was all about automated grocery fulfillment, but with custom-made robotics. So Jose was a founder of this company, but realized that this was going to be too slow, that the market was moving way too fast for you to build your own robotics from the ground up. And so he sort of divested himself of that company and started Takeoff. And Takeoff's model was all about automated grocery fulfillment, but using existing robotic technology so that you could go out of the gate like that and not have to spend years refining the reliability of your robots. So that's how Takeoff got started. And about a year in, Amazon bought Whole Foods, which just lit a fire under the grocery retail industry, as you can imagine.
Right. And so as you think about sort of your place in this space, and the term micro fulfillment, give me a little bit of a sense of what, when you and your company thinks about micro fulfillment, what that means, and why do you see that being the sort of growing trend and by the way, both in groceries and my sense is not just groceries, you're gonna see this.
Yeah, absolutely. So especially when you think about grocery, it's a really tough area. You've got a lot of low value product. It needs to be cold, kept at different temperatures. It's fragile. Some of it's bulky. And most people live within 5 miles of a grocery store. So the idea of taking grocery fulfillment and moving it out into the industrial warehouse areas of the world where you got 50, 75 miles to come back into the city centers, that incurs a lot of transportation costs, a lot of time to get that going. And so if you can utilize the existing real estate and infrastructure of the store, then your transportation costs go way down to get that last mile to the customer, and you're utilizing space that already exists. You don't have a huge capital investment, takes years to build up, et cetera. So micro fulfillment is really interesting because it does utilize that existing space. It keeps the goods close to the end customer, so you really drive down that last mile cost, and you give yourself a lot of flexibility around speed for next day, same day as opposed to next day fulfillment.
And as we kind of going more and more in sort of micro fulfillment, it's it's a significant business model different from what you experienced at Wayfarer.
Yeah.
How would you describe the differences in your job in managing the operations at a place like Wayfarer and managing the operations in a place like Takeoff?
Yeah, so there's some pieces that are so similar, and then there are other pieces that are vastly different. So the similar piece is at Wayfarer, we were working with 10,000 different furniture suppliers and trying to figure out how to get these suppliers to ship furniture fast, on time, and without damage from their own warehouses, right? So you're basically trying to provide free consulting that they haven't asked for to help them understand how to do drop ship and e-commerce, and you have zero authority whatsoever. With Takeoff, I have been actually shocked at how similar grocery retailers are to furniture suppliers. They're both this kind of old school industry. It's not super high tech. They're not they're not super sophisticated around data. And they've been doing things the same way for a long time, right? But the world is changing. They need help. And so that's the similarity, is that both Wayfarer and Takeoff are basically enabling these old school industries to get into this world of e-commerce. The part that's different is Wayfarer definitely did and has established its own warehouses, its own delivery network, all of that kind of thing. But one, we did that later in the game, and two, with Wayfarer, you've got, warehouses that are 1 million square feet. They have to be able to serve up everything from literally, couches and dining room sets to forks and spoons, and tableware. So you have to be, it's very difficult. We actually couldn't bring in very much automation because the disparity of the types of things we're shipping out was so great.
Now, as we're both zooming back and forth, I assume you're in your home and I'm in my home. This is an unprecedented time. How has sort of this chaos, the COVID environment, how has this impacted Takeoff? How has it changed your business? How has it changed how you're thinking? What are you doing to offer support and operate in this time? Tell us a little bit about how it's impacted you.
Sure, yeah. It's, it's impacted us in good ways and TBD, but potentially some scary ways. The good ways are that clearly every grocery retailer is, if they hadn't already gotten the message about online, they are getting the message about online. I mean, the demand has just gone through the roof. What our retailers are seeing, 50, 60% plus increases in demand from their online side. Overall, groceries up about 25, 30% month over month, but the increase in online is even higher. And even 60% is kind of artificially low, because what a lot of retailers are having to do is cap open slots. They right now, our retailers, their slots are filled for 2 weeks. So that's even artificially low. So they're getting the message about online. We also are starting to hear from other countries who are ahead of the curve with COVID that the online grocery demand, once people start going back to normal, it's not going back down to previous levels. There's something that's happening where once people get over the hump and they put their list in their app and they do all that stuff, they're actually maintaining the online grocery after they're allowed to go out of the house. So that's super interesting and great for us. The other thing that's been great is it's really, we have 5 live sites that are operating. They were all at all different, levels in their ramping volume, and basically overnight they are just all at 100% capacity. Which for a startup who's, we've been operating sites for now 18 months, this is momentous. I think the interesting challenges for us are, we are a startup, right? So we launched our first site in November of last year. We are launching site number 6 right now. We're still learning. We're still figuring out the playbook for how do you get these things up and running? How do you ramp them quickly? How do you do all this? And with this site we're launching right now, it's in Canada. So, I normally will have anywhere from 10 to 20 people on site during a launch to, all the different integrations, the technology, the hardware software piece. I have two people in Canada. Wow. One who was already in Canada, and one guy who was able to talk his way across the border and avoid a 14-day quarantine. So, so having to figure out how to get the job done with borders closing, all this sort of stuff is a challenge.
Right. Now, we always tell our students, when there's challenges, there's opportunities for learning, right? So has it uncovered any insights, surprises, lessons about your business that you think you're going to be taking going forward, while we're going through this?
Yeah, so a lot of them have been really good, actually. So, because we are in the process literally of launching another site right now today with only 2 people on the ground, I've been so just proud of the team and the way they've been collaborating so that these folks who are supporting remotely can provide the right support at the right times to keep the whole project moving with 100% remote support. So that's been huge. And I think it's also really helped us. Sometimes when you're on site and you're launching a site, we still don't have the playbook. You've got the client there watching you, it's like a real tense situation and you're getting the job done, but you might not be documenting everything that you're doing along the way.
Right.
And here we actually are creating like a really good, robust playbook for how we're going to do these in the future because, you've got more people who are able to have that presence of mind. So,
I mean, here's a question, and this is a little bit of an open-ended question, but I get, particularly small and growing companies, I get, how am I going to survive? What should I do? You're in a little bit of a different sort of situation because in some ways this accelerates your business. But you also deal with a lot of companies that are smaller grocery. You have any advice for them in dealing with this, either from what you've seen or in talking to people from countries who may have, hopefully kind of, the curve is flattened?
Yeah, so definitely the most important thing, and I think that most companies are doing this, is increasing the amount of transparency and communication with your employees, right? Like this is a completely new space that we're all working in, and there's a lot of uncertainty. Nobody knows when this will end. Nobody knows what it'll look like to come back from this. And so increasing transparency and communication across the team is really, really important. I think the other thing, and this is easier said, for companies like us who can do remote working and things like that, but really being creative and working with your employees on how they can best manage, the people I feel really, the most empathy for are those who have, toddlers at home who have no daycare, so they got the two parents trying to work with toddlers at home. And so I think the message is really like, how do you take care of your employees? Because when this all ends, when things get back to normal, whatever normal becomes, it's your employees who are making or breaking whether you're able to succeed coming out of this. So employees and customers, keeping that transparency and communication, I think, is the most important thing.
Right. For you personally as a leader, other than trying to communicate more and really empathizing and making sure that your employees are taken care of, as a leader in the company, have you learned anything either about what you have to do differently as a leader or what you have to do more as a leader? Has it uncovered anything for you as a leader in an organization?
Well, so tactically, one of the things which I knew already, but has been thrown into very sharp relief, is with the inability to get out in the field, right? Because there's all these travel restrictions. It really throws into very high relief how robust our access to data needs to be. One of the things that was amazing about Wayfarer, and I really miss at Takeoff, is Wayfarer had a very mature and amazing set of data and access to data. Literally anyone in the entire company has access to 100% of the data that exists for Wayfarer at any point in time. So you can look at suppliers, categories, this, that, the other thing, literally anything, and it's all there and very accessible. When I started at Takeoff, we literally had nothing, no data. Like the software had been built without any thought to data at all. And we've been building up our pool, our data warehouse, et cetera. But now with the inability to get out in the field, think about it, right? I only have 5 sites live right now. Next year I'll probably have 50. If something like this happens and I have no visibility systematically into what's going on at all these sites, I mean, that is frightening to me. So for me, tactically, it's really put into sharper relief how quickly and with what sense of urgency we need to get moving on really building a robust data accessibility.
Right. I mean, and that kind of connects with often we talk about artificial intelligence and data analytics and all of these tech tools. Other than just having access to data, where does all of that fit into sort of the future plans and ramp up of the company?
Yeah, very much so. It's actually one of our clients is Albertsons Safeway, and we were talking with them a couple weeks ago about expanding our partnership, and one of the things that the CEO Vivek said is that he'd love to see us develop sort of like a franchise model type of playbook, so that it's not only how do you get these things up and running, but how do you optimize the micro fulfillment center? How do you make sure that within X weeks after go live, you are firing on all cylinders? Right. And how do you make that so you don't have to send a bunch of people to do hand-to-hand training, that kind of thing, but you basically provide them with what I imagine McDonald's has, where they say, okay, here's how you run a profitable McDonald's, like that kind of a thing. We're like very early days, right, as a startup, so we're figuring out what the recipe is and don't have it all down yet, but I think that is definitely something that we're going to need to build, is that because these sites, the retailer buys the hardware, we set it up, train their team, but it's their team that runs these sites. It's not Takeoff's team. It's 100% retailer owned and run. And then Takeoff operates sort of like a SaaS model. So we take X% of revenue from the sites on an ongoing basis. So it is really how do you make it so the retailer can be super successful in rolling these out at scale.
Right. And again, this is questions I get all the time about sort of the post-COVID world, right? And so when all of this is said and done, and you've already touched on a little bit where people, some of the habits that we have now, we aren't going to go back to pre-COVID habits. Some of them are going to stay. Is there anything else as you as a company, as you're thinking about the post-COVID world and ramping up, and is there anything else that you think about that you've got to be ready to handle, any scenarios that you've got to be ready for? Any advice to companies thinking about that sort of the post and the ramp up that we hope will come from the flattened curve?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've already seen is happen during COVID that I think is going to be an interesting discussion post-COVID is whenever we engage with a retailer, the very first question, which is very thorny for them, is what is the assortment that I'm going to offer online? Mm-hmm. So a typical grocery store can have anywhere from 40 to 80,000 unique SKUs. Mm-hmm. In the micro fulfillment center, we can fit 15,000 SKUs. So that is significantly less than their total catalog. Now, the reality is that if you look at sales data, 15,000 SKUs for every retailer represents about 95% of sales. But grocery retailers are used to, people walking the aisles, the placement in the aisles, all that kind of physical, tangible store things. And they have a hard time disconnecting that and thinking about what would happen if I just offered a curated assortment online. Would that be better? Would it be worse? With the COVID, what's happening is that the entire grocery supply chain is, in tatters, right? Like toilet paper, Purell, everything, flour, like you can't get flour at the store. So they're trying to figure out, they're actually getting pushed into the situation where they actually kind of have to offer a curated assortment because that's all they have, right? That's what they have. So I think that's going to be a pretty seismic potential shift, and it'll be interesting to see, like, as we come out of this and supply chains recover and everything, do grocery chains go back to, yes, I have 40,000 items and that's why people shop my store, Or do they say, hey, we actually don't need to have 40,000 items, or at least we don't need to sell 40,000 items online. So TBD, yeah.
That's really interesting, because you can think about the implications. So we've been focusing on the grocers themselves, but you can think about the suppliers. And so if in fact we do have a focusing of the SKUs that they offer, just think about the implications for people trying to get shelves, whether it's real shelf space or virtual shelf space, right? The implications for smaller companies trying to get shelf space and what that would mean for the industry going forward.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and in that, and what about, so you've talked about Albertsons and Kroger. Is the focus to in the future to work with the larger chains and to go, or is it to work with more? Is it still going to be a mix of local grocers, or what's your view as sort of going forward? What's going to be the strategic focus?
Yeah, that's an excellent question that frankly we talk about pretty much once a month as a leadership team. Yeah, it's so hard to know. When we started, I mean, this technology is this whole concept is brand new, and we're talking about grocery retailers, so they're not necessarily like so quick to hop on board with a new idea, right? So we started with a very small mom and pop regional grocery chain in Florida, and then we, got a couple other. We got Ahold Delhaize, which is pretty big. We got Albertsons. We got Wakefern in New Jersey, which is the largest employer in New Jersey. And then what we started to see, mostly on the international side, is one of our competitors is a company called Ocado. People are probably familiar with Ocado. Ocado builds big scale grocery fulfillment centers. So, 500,000 square feet. It's super automated, but they have to be located, in industrial spaces, and then they have the transportation question. So what we started to see internationally is when Ocado would go to a market, say Australia, New Zealand, Ocado went there, they signed a contract with Coles, which is one of the top two players in grocery in Australia, New Zealand. Woolworths, who's the other player, came to us, and that was our like fastest contract signing we'd ever experienced. They came to us within 3 months. We had a contract signed, and that's been playing out again and again internationally for us. Is that Ocado goes to a market, they sign a deal with one of the players. Part of the deal is exclusivity, so they can only work with that retailer. And then the number one or number two, the other retailer basically goes out looking, and we're more often than not kind of getting the contract at that point. So to a certain extent, that's been great. It's actually forced us to go international much faster than I was hoping to, but has been great. I mean, basically we have a sales team of one person. That's our sales team, because essentially Ocado is kind of going out and doing the sales for us. So.
And did your Wayfarer international experience, has that helped you on this side, or how has it helped you on this side?
Yeah, it definitely has. One, just having international teams and understanding, hey, it's not all the same rules as the US, and some of the basic stuff. And then two, really having an appreciation, a visceral appreciation for time zones, for how you need to operate in order to cover, the whole globe. So yeah, it's definitely been super helpful.
Right. And what I'm gonna do now, I could keep going asking you a bunch of questions, but I want to make sure that that we get some time for Q&A, and I'll probably jump back and forth in with some of my questions. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up. I think Joe McDonald's going to be moderating and bringing some questions to the floor. As we make the transition, though, I want to thank you, because you're hiring one of our CDS fellows, Chris Waltham. And so we love Chris. We're happy that he's going with you. We're sure he's going to do a great job. So treat him well.
Oh, absolutely. We have two Tuckies coming this summer. So Chris Waltham and Chris Carey.
Okay.
So yeah, we're very excited.
Great, great. So Joe, do you have a couple of questions that you want to, so I don't, because I'll keep asking questions because it's so interesting, but you have a couple of questions you want to jump in on?
I've actually got some great questions up, and since you mentioned Chris, Chris Carey, he did throw up a question, so I'll start with Chris. But he mentions that he knows Takeoff is moving towards a more agile way of organizing and planning your work, especially as the product side is concerned. So if you're putting on your operations hat, what are you excited about regarding the movement towards agile? And do you think it will work? And where do you think it may butt heads with operations?
Oh no, the agile flow for software development and product work has been fantastic. You know, as opposed to the old sort of waterfall methodology where the business owner has to sort of paint the picture of what they want, they toss it over to the engineering group, and then they wait months and months and months, and they get something back and then realize, oh shoot, I should have had to do this, or didn't realize that button would, you know, need to do this or whatever. Agile basically has every 2 weeks, the business owner and the product and tech team come together and sort of review, okay, here's what it looks like so far, and have an opportunity to shift and adjust along the way. And in my experience, you just can't think of all the different scenarios and all the different things that could happen or that you would want to consider at the beginning of a project. So having that opportunity to iterate is so helpful. And it's really, really been helpful, especially for operations, because at various points, we can inject different people from client side, the operators, et cetera, and make sure that what we get out at the end is really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And one thing we wanted to jump back to too, we had a great question regarding when you first were getting started at Takeoff and as you were really trying to build the brand, what were some of the ways in which Takeoff instilled trust among those early adopters of the technology? What were some of your tactics to build that trust with those clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's really a couple things. So one, I think strategically, making the decision to partner with an existing, well-known automation, you know, material handling company. So Takeoff partners with Canop for the actual robotic hardware was so smart. Again, we're talking about grocery retailers. You know, if you think about grocery stores, you can literally go back to like early 1900s. And grocery stores don't look all that different. You know, they don't, there's like a few little things like some automated checkouts and stuff like that. But really, it is very low tech, and it has not changed in the last 100 years a whole lot. So when you think about going to that group and saying, hey, we'd like to bring goods to person automation into your store, and it's going to cost, you know, $2.5–3 million, and it's going to do all this stuff. It's like, that's crazy. If you come with that and you can show them, hey, this shuttle that we're using to bring the goods along these conveyors and this, that, and the other thing, it's been in use for 17 years. And here's 17 years of reliability data. Then you can start to see how grocery retailers can say, okay, I'm willing to take a small leap of faith on this, as opposed to, you know, something that's completely unknown. So I think that was a huge strategic piece. I think the second thing that's been super helpful to Takeoff is both our one salesperson and our CEO, Jose, have both been in grocery for many years. They have been grocers. And grocery is one of those things where if you're not a grocer, you're not a grocer. It's, you know, grocery industry does not believe that if you haven't been in grocery that you can understand the industry. So that was also super helpful. And then I think the third thing is really a lot of what made Wayfarer successful too with furniture suppliers. When we come to the table, we bring a team of people who are smart, can break things down in a way that people can understand, who can easily represent how this is going to change and what the difference are going to be, who can engage with the client on a level that that makes them understand how we're going to bring this all together and what it's going to look like. And that is really important.
Yeah. Let me just jump back in because you mentioned Canop, and the question I had here was, like, what are the challenges in managing this ecosystem? Because you don't control the hardware, so they bring the hardware. And by the way, you really don't control the execution because the grocers are doing that, yet your future business, the benefit, your revenue depends on all of this working. How do you make sure all of these parts fit and work and get the benefits that you want to happen coming out of this?
Yeah, and this is where I really take so much from my Wayfarer experience, because very similarly, you know, with 10,000 furniture suppliers that we have no control over, and yet that drives, you know, our ability to advertise things shipping out with 2-day, you know, delivery, and, you know, and the customer experience and the number of calls we get, you know, all that sort of stuff. You have to be able to really successfully manage players that you do not have any official authority over. Now, luckily, I think both at Wayfarer and at Takeoff, our incentives are incredibly well aligned with the retailer. If the micro fulfillment center does what it purports to do, then the cost to serve an order online for the retailer is half the cost that it is to serve an order to a customer who comes in and shops the store themselves. So typical cost for a grocery retailer when you and I come and shop ourselves is 26% of sales. If Takeoff does what it's supposed to do, the cost for an online order is 13% of sales. That's gigantic. That is gigantic. So that like changes the entire game, especially if you think about, if it's 26% of sales for a regular, you know, you go to the store yourself, the online cost for an online order for grocery today, with just either they pay Instacart to do it or they pay their own shoppers to do it or whatever, it's, you know, it's an order of magnitude higher. It's like close to 40% of sales for that order. So to go from 40% to 13% of sales as your cost is unbelievable. So we have very well aligned incentives to make this work, and we do go into it with them as a partnership.
Mm-hmm. All right, Joe, back to you.
Great. Yeah, so one of the questions that came up is, how do you expect COVID do you think it will permanently change customers' expectations versus in e-commerce versus brick and mortar, whether it be just curbside or with Amazon's presence in the space moving forward all the way from curb to the home, including perishables?
Yeah, I do think that it is going to permanently change. So one, I think that, you know, the online penetration for grocery in 2019 was about 6% in the US, was about 3% globally, and it was going up at between 20 and 30% year over year. I think that obviously we've gone from this curve to like a big step up, and I think that a decent amount of that volume is going to stick. So I think we've just accelerated the penetration curve almost overnight. In addition, I do think that, you know, in many ways, if that demand stays high, think about things that people deal with and complain about today. So if anybody has gone to the grocery store and you know go and you're trying to fight through multiple sort of Instacart or Amazon, you know, shoppers who are trying to shop in the aisles just the same way you are, like, it's not a great customer experience. And so if we're going to have this step change, and that's going to be it's going to really put pressure on retailers to figure out a way to separate the online and the in-store customer experience as a minimum.
Great, thank you. And you know, jumping back to where you said working with retailers, you know, grocers, no grocers. We've actually got a question from a grocer and also a Tucky from 95 who runs 7 grocery stores in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Their main supplier is Spartan Nash, and he also works with Free Shop for their curbside. He's just curious, how should he view Takeoff? Is it as a partner, competitor? Is it not applicable? Where do you see that fitting into, a very local chain like his in Kalamazoo?
Yeah, so it goes a little bit back to the question Alva asked about, like, are we going to, as Takeoff as a company, strategically going to focus on the big players or the small players or in the middle, or what are we doing? I mean, right now, what we're seeing is that we have enough demand and a pipeline of the big players that we aren't probably going to spend a lot of time with the smaller, more regional players at this moment. That could change, but that's sort of where we think we're going because that's what we're seeing in the pipeline. Really, I think that, someone like the T95, really we should be sort of invisible, right? Because we're not creating grocery stores. We're not creating, we are simply plugging in with existing retailers to make their operations more efficient. So I think to the extent that they compete with other retailers who might be using our services, then that should be a sort of warning or message that, hey, this is going to get faster. There's probably not going to be any fees attached. Maybe there's going to be free delivery, because if you think about that, again, that 13% cost instead of 26 plus, when that's working, like, what can the grocer do with that competitively, right? They can certainly have same prices in the store as online. They can have no fees. They can offer free delivery. They can lower the prices if they want. Like, there's a lot you can do with that much margin. And I'm sure they'll take some of it and put in their pockets, but I'm sure they're also going to give some of it back in one way or another.
Great. Thanks. We've got a few more questions. Alva, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I just wanted to say we had started talking a little bit about micro fulfillment, and I wanted to have other industries tried to talk with you about what you do, understanding what Takeoff is doing in thinking about doing it in other non-grocery industries?
Yes, they have. And so far, as you might imagine, we've sort of been like, hey, let's crack grocery first. Like, let us get a couple hundred of these in grocery, and then we'll be thinking about it. But yes, yeah, definitely other industries have started talking to us and have expressed interest. Another area where Knop does a lot of work in this space is with pharmacy. So that's definitely. There's another piece, this is still grocery related, but it's kind of a different model, which is, if you think about what the micro fulfillment center does, it takes product that is sold in cases and it makes it very, very easy to sell in eaches, right? So it takes it from case to an each. And if you think about the world and who besides customers would value that type of service, another area is the convenience stores, the mini marts and all those sorts of things that have like half an aisle of groceries. They have zero storage space, right? So they are limited in what they can have by how much space they have. They have no back room. Usually when you go to the restroom at those places, like, you're stepping over some boxes or something. They have no space. So imagine that you also thought about using these micro fulfillment centers as distribution centers to feed convenience stores. Now you could say, okay, well, if it's super easy and cost effective to get eaches, now that convenience store, that 8 feet of aisle could have a lot more variety. It could have fresh, perishable goods. It just opens up the world of what a convenience store could offer. And again, that's not our core focus, but we are very aware of the opportunities there.
Okay, great.
Does Takeoff have any plans to really build a moat, so to speak, around what you can do to prevent other companies from doing what you're doing? Obviously, you've got first to market advantage in a lot of ways, but what are you doing, if anything, right now to make sure you're capitalizing and capturing that market share?
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely have the first mover advantage, which is great. We also are, I think, proving out. We have typically the clients start with a pilot, which might be 1 to 3 sites, and then they say, okay, this is great, and then they sign up for a program, which is 10, 20, 30 sites. So we are already seeing retailers come back to us and order programs worth of sites. So that's a good sign. And that infers like a little bit of a switching cost, right? So it's not just about getting the site ready, building the installing the hardware and training the people. There's a lot around integration with the retailer. So, inventory, order management system, transportation, routing, et cetera. So all of those things have to be, thought through, and the integrations need to be figured out for all of those things. And that is, it's a fairly heavy lift. And so I think that there's like a switching cost that, by virtue of being first to market, we're also making sure that it's hard for people to decide to use other services. And then the final thing, which I think is really another thing I learned from Wayfarer, in the early days in Wayfarer, the problem was we had all these suppliers and they didn't know how to do drop ship. And so the experience to the customer was terrible, right? And so, at the leadership level, there was sort of 2 ways of thinking. One was, hey, we could teach them how to do drop ship and we could help them and get them up the curve. Or we could go the way of Target and Walmart and we could institute penalties and chargebacks and, all these things, financial repercussions to try to make them follow the rules. And I feel like one of the most important things that I did at Wayfarer was sort of argued vehemently for the teaching and consulting and partnering approach, which is what we did. And I can tell you, at Wayfarer, it just paid back in spades. When Amazon came and decided that they were going to get into home furnishings and all that sort of stuff, the goodwill that we had built up with the suppliers by working with them, by helping them figure out how to integrate this into their supply chains was unbelievable. And we had many suppliers who basically would sign, exclusivity agreements with us. So all new product they came out with, Wayfarer would have a year of it free before they give it to any other player. And I think that's what we're trying to do at Takeoff too, is like, look, we're not just going to come in, build a machine, train your people and walk away. No, we are committed to working with you to make sure that you get 100% out of this facility. And if that means helping you figure out how to get your staff to execute, that's what we're going to do. We're all in.
If I jump again, we've talked, a lot about changing customers' expectations sort of post the ramp up. What about the supply chain? How do you think this situation is going to impact the supply chain? We talked a little bit about sort of temporary, like, we're out of stuff, you can't get stuff. But long term, how do you see this impacting on the supply chain side?
Yeah, so one thing that's been interesting that people are just starting to wake up to, and even the big players, is they were wholly unprepared for how to prioritize and decide who gets what of scarce resources in a situation like this. So most of the big players, they also own their own distribution, right? So they have their own warehouses where they're feeding different stores, all over different regions. And they'd had just I don't think had ever given any thought to a scarcity situation where they had to make choices about which store gets something, which don't, and then thinking about online as well. And what we're seeing right now is retailers are just starting to realize, oh, wait a minute, let's prioritize the micro fulfillment centers, because those places can get the stuff out, at orders of magnitude faster and more volume than our stores can. And so, and it's less expensive for us. So prioritizing the supply chain that way. So I think that's going to be like the first takeaway is thinking about, in times of scarcity, how do you prioritize? Oh, I think
You
you're
were on
on
mute. I
mute.
just unmuted you.
Oh yeah. No, I was gonna say, Joe, did you have any other questions? So before I ask, my questions.
Yeah, I'll do one that was related a little bit to scaling up. You mentioned that you do some pilots with, let's say, a larger grocer. Do you find that you've found some basically savings every time you go into another location of each of those stores, whether it be from a training standpoint, from implementation of the physical space, just to make sure that scalability is really, really easy for them and transition?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Even just we launched 2 sites with Albertsons late last year. The first site, full complement of people, full everything, took all the lead up to it. The second site, I had 2 people on site. All the integration was done. The testing that we do, usually take a week to do testing. It took a day and a half. It was just like that. That's why our incentives are so well aligned. Not only do we only make money if they make money, but for us, if we end up doing 1 to 5 sites for 100 different retailers, that will not make Takeoff successful. We only are going to be successful if we do many dozens, 50s, hundreds of sites with clients, because then you take all that upfront cost and investment in integration, and you really start leveraging it.
Excellent. So looking at the clock, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So Alba, I'll hand it off to you for any final questions or thoughts.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, so we have a couple of our Tuckies coming to work for you, and a little bit of a time for you to sort of compliment yourself. But what's the experience of working at Takeoff? Like, what makes it a great place to work? Why do you think you're going to hang around? Why should someone, both as someone working there, but somebody working with you as well, why should people want to work for and with Takeoff?
Yeah. So that's easy for me to answer. When I left Wayfarer, I'd been there 9 years. I knew that I was ready to leave. I ended up giving them a year's notice, and I took the summer off and really, thought a lot about what I wanted to do. And fundamentally, it came down to the first 5 years at Wayfarer was absolutely amazing. We were in a space where there was no recipe, no blueprint. We had to solve a problem that no one had ever solved before. And you couldn't look it up in a book. You couldn't call someone. You literally had to figure it out with your team. And to me, that was the point in my life where I just felt the most alive. You're firing on all synapses. You're incredibly challenged. Of course you have frustrations and all that kind of stuff, but you just, the excitement of the challenge and the problem solving and the teamwork that goes into trying to figure it out is so much fun that that's fundamentally what I was looking for again. And when I found Takeoff, it really, really fulfilled everything I was looking for. Here's a huge business opportunity. Here's, I know that I've seen this before with Wayfarer, so I know how incredibly impactful this can be. And it's another one of those challenges, like nobody knows how to do this. We created micro fulfillment centers, but we do not know yet how to operate them at 100%. We are figuring that out. And 1, we have to figure out how to get them optimized. And then 2, we have to figure out how to scale the process so we can do it, 100 times a year. So it's, to me, that level of challenge and excitement and collaboration and teamwork is so much fun. And I think that's why, people are coming to work for Takeoff, because when you have an opportunity to work in an environment that's super collaborative, very dynamic, fast-paced, growing fast, and you're working on really challenging problems that nobody knows how to solve, it's one of those amazing opportunities in your life where you probably learn more than you ever have before, and you come away with amazing experiences that'll take you wherever you want to go.
And people doing business with you. Now, of course, it's, you said the incentives are aligned, and much of the pitch is we're going to both save you money and make you money. But is there anything else why people enjoy or want to partner with you?
I think that they are incredibly excited about the idea of bringing automation into this like super low tech environment and making it something that's really sustainable. We forgot to play the video. Renee had worked so hard on this video, but you can go online at Takeoff, and there's like a 1-minute video that you can play that shows you the automation, shows you how everything works. Literally, when you come into a site and you watch this thing going, it is pretty beautiful. It's like a work of art, and you can't help get excited about it.
Yeah. In fact, I was laughing. There's a video where you're comparing micro fulfillment to someone shopping at the store, and it's worth just the comedic value anyway, where you have the guy walking around. And
yeah.
So yeah, no, it's. I was like, it's just pretty funny to see the difference. We're closing up here. Thank you so much for making the time. Thank you for making groceries and food and supplies more accessible in this tough time. I think we appreciate that more and more. And I think there are lots of people who've never ever thought about supply chain who are thinking about it now. And so we appreciate all you do. We look forward to your success, and we're pleased and happy of all the success you've had. And thank you very much for making the time. And thanks to Alumni Engagement and Amanda and Renee and everybody to opening this up, not just to, in addition to the Tuck students, but to our alumni community at large. And so hello, and thank you for all the alumni community as well. But we really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was great. Great fun.